It's another edition of Bills by the Numbers, where we let the stats tell you where the Bills are at. We're brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Coming up, it's projection time for 2025. Where does ESPN's Football Power Index have the Bills? We'll check in with ESPN analytics writer Seth Walder to find out. Steve is quizzed on one-loss record history versus Buffalo's 2025 opponents, and we'll have our one burning question. Let's talk wins and losses. All right, pleased to have you here with us on Bills by the Numbers. Bills Wall of Famer Steve Tasker, Bills play-by-play man Chris Brown with you as always. And it's that time of year with NFL rosters largely set. It's time for 2025 projections. First and foremost, ESPN's Football Power Index has the Bills ranked fifth behind in order: Philadelphia, Kansas City, Baltimore, and Detroit. For those who do not know, Football Power Index measures a team's true strength based on a net point scale and an expected point margin versus an average opponent on a neutral field. Did you get all that? Mm-hmm. Buffalo's total FPI is a 4.6, and the Eagles top this list at 5.5. So we're talking about what amounts to a marginal difference, and in essence means none of them would be favored by more than a point over another on a neutral field. The biggest reason why the Bills were fifth is because of their defense, which ranks 12th in their Football Power Index, and their special teams, which ranks 28th. Now, those are defensive units and special teams units that, as of now, obviously, are sight unseen. So despite being tops in the league in offense in their FPI rankings, their defense and special teams pulls their collective FPI down. Now, I think both Steve and I believe the defense and special teams will demonstrate improvement for the Bills this fall. The question is, to what degree must that defense and special teams improve, Steve, to get Buffalo to the Super Bowl?
Well, the old adage was back in the day, it's always been special teams should win you two games. That was in a 16-game schedule. Win 2 games and lose you 0.
But you've said in recent years it's harder for special teams to generate that kind of a margin, right?
Very much so. And a lot of times in most games, you're very happy if you get a push. If you don't give up a big play, don't get a big play, don't turn it over. I mean, you don't
have a miscue.
Right, don't have a miscue. Don't give up a 50-yard return, even if it doesn't go for a touchdown, flip the field. You got to make them work for every yard. Doesn't always happen that way. But I think that's got to be the low bar.
The floor.
That's got to be the floor.
Yeah.
Certainly, Tyler Bass hitting a 61-yarder to beat Miami, that's a huge plus.
Yeah.
Codrington's returns last year I thought were a huge plus. The Bills don't punt that much. Punt coverage, and I'll say this too, as a former guy who used to chase kicks, if you don't do it very much, you're not very good at it. So your offense is good, but your punt coverage unit is going to stink because they don't have any reps.
Yeah, you don't punt.
You don't get live reps. You can never, I say never, you almost never get any live special teams reps except in games. Mm-hmm. Historically, the best kickoff return team in the National Football League has been the ones with the worst defensive units because they give up points, they get kicked off to a lot, they get a lot of live reps. That kind of that's still the case, except that last year nobody returned kicks anyway, right? This year that might change. And with the Bills scoring a lot of points, they're going to get a lot of reps covering kicks. They're going to get better at it.
Yeah, and I'm encouraged with Chris Tabor on board as special teams coordinator. This is a veteran special teams coach who's done it at the NFL level. It's the first time since 2018 that the Bills have had a special teams coordinator in that seat with prior NFL experience in that role. I think what he's going to be able to bring to the table in terms of scheming will help give Buffalo some edges here and there through the course of the season as well. And it's been well documented what the Bills have done to add to their defensive unit, both on the back end and the front end, with a huge number of newcomers in plentiful supply. Now, what's more interesting is when it comes to ESPN's win total projections. Buffalo is atop the league with a win projection of 10.6. Right behind them is Baltimore and Kansas City at 10.4, Philadelphia at 10.2. We'll get it confirmed from Seth Walder when we catch up with him, but we have to believe that Buffalo's strength of schedule, or lack thereof, likely came into play with this projection.
It has to. You look at, we make a big deal out of the schedule because it's a lot of fun because so many of us plan travel and trips. But that's just for us, right? It's for our personal, it's for our fun, right? When you start getting into it about the competitive side of it, the Bills' schedule, as much as it could be, being a first-place schedule, is a cakewalk. As much as an NFL schedule can be a cakewalk.
Yeah.
You've only got 6 teams on the schedule that were in the playoffs last year. Not 9, 6. That's hard to do with a first-place schedule, particularly also that they're playing the NFC South, Tampa Bay and New Orleans, Carolina,
Atlanta.
all that, and Atlanta. That all kind of rolls into it. A weak division out of conference.
Well, all of those teams were very middling teams, with the exception of Tampa Bay, who won the division and made the playoffs.
That's right. There you have it. It's going to be, the Bills should be able to make hay during stretches of their season. They should put together some win streaks. Now, they always seem to, with Josh and these guys. And this offense is a load. I mean, it's a wrecking crew. So they're going to score points this year again. So that alone will win them games because other teams' offenses can't be that efficient. They're just not ready for it.
Yeah.
So the schedule really is tilted in Buffalo's favor when you look at other teams in that, like this group of elite teams, the Baltimores and Detroits and the Kansas Cities of the world. Yeah. So Bills fans have every reason to be very optimistic. There may be there's a scenario where the Bills, even in week to week through the season, the Bills may never be the underdog in a game.
Yeah. ESPN's analytics has the Bills atop the league with an 81.1% chance to make the playoffs and a 65% chance to win the division, also highest in the league. Knowing the competitive nature of other divisions, like the AFC North, the AFC West, and the NFC North, just to name a few, you can understand why Buffalo is such a heavy favorite to win their 6th straight division title. We're expecting, a team like New England to improve, Steve, but to threaten them for the division title, even with a soft 4th-place schedule, seems unlikely.
Well, so much has changed in New England. I mean, we're blindfolded and throwing darts. You don't know what to expect. Even if they double their win total last year, it's not going to be good enough. That'd be give them 8 wins. They were 4-13. They could not win games. And one of the wins was a Week 18 laydown by the Bills.
Game,
yeah. By all rights, it should have been 3-14, their season. Their roster needed a lot of work, which they had the money and they spent it and tried to refurbish it with a new head coach.
Yep.
They're on a honeymoon period. They built this team the way Mike Vrabel wanted it built,
and
as
they have
best
a franchise
they could.
quarterback.
And they got a quarterback that people are very high on.
Yeah.
So you and I are very bullish on the Patriots. I think they're going to get much better as that season rolls along.
But even then, that's probably 8,
I don't know,
maybe 9 wins.
We've seen teams go from worst to first, but most of those teams didn't have Josh Allen and the Bills in their division. Right. I mean,
they're in the NFC South.
That's right.
Or AFC South.
But that doesn't mean New England wouldn't lump up some teams,
and they have a soft schedule too. Their hardest home game is Buffalo. I mean,
right.
Everybody else they play, it's like, oh my gosh, do they have anybody challenging them at home for home games?
So they've got. So yeah, I'm not. I'd like to know what other teams. There's nobody in the South other than the division winner. The West, I don't know. Maybe in the West there's 1 or 2, but outside of that, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, Cleveland, behind Baltimore, you're looking at the wild card round of the playoffs.
Yeah,
New England can get into that group. I think New England can get into that group.
They could, and we'll see. I mean, and look, the other teams in Buffalo's division, Miami, I have them as a top 3 team in this league to completely implode this season. And while I respect Aaron Glenn as a first-time head coach, with that ownership group and the lack of player development for the better part of the last 50 years, he is pushing a giant boulder up the hill. And in year one, I just don't see him getting it where he'd like to. There's going to be some hard lessons learned in New York this year for the Jets and Aaron Glenn. Bills are also projected to have the greatest chance to reach the divisional playoff at almost 58%, greatest chance to reach the AFC title game at almost 34%. After that, it gets interesting. Buffalo is third most likely, according to ESPN projections, to reach the Super Bowl at 18.4%. The two teams ahead of them, Philadelphia at 20.1%, and they really don't count because they're in the NFC, and Kansas City.
Really? Wow, what a surprise.
0.2%. Again, we'll check in with our guest Seth Walder on this in a bit, but head-to-head history, I would think, has to be a factor with why the Chiefs are slightly ahead of the Bills in this projection. Your thoughts, Steve?
I could have written that without doing the research like you did.
Yeah.
You know,
but it's 19.2 to 18.4. Again, it's less than a point here that we're talking about.
And some of it is going to have to do with how Baltimore fares this year and what happens around the rest of the conference, the AFC. If you look around, I mean, think about it, my friends. I mean, if you look around at the conference standings, you've got Kansas City, Buffalo, Baltimore, and then it goes Houston, the Chargers, Pittsburgh, Denver.
That was last year, yeah.
That was last year, the way it fell. Cincinnati was just out of the playoffs.
I think we're expecting Denver to be better this year.
We're expecting Cincinnati to get off to a faster start? Or
maybe.
Did their defense get better?
I don't know about that.
And then you're back into – you get out – the 8 is Cincinnati. 9 was Indianapolis last year.
Yeah.
And with what was going on there, their owner passed away. There's going to be some turmoil in Indianapolis that – remains to be seen how it's going to affect that squad. And then you're right back to Miami and the Jets. So Denver, Pittsburgh, and the Chargers and Houston are outside of Kansas City, Buffalo, Baltimore, who are the elite of the conference. And it looks like they're going to be right back there again because of the guys taking snaps, because of the continuity of the front office, the continuity of coaching staff, because of what they've got at the top of the roster and the guys they've got tied up who are happy playing where they're playing.
Yeah.
I mean, those three teams are just not going anywhere. It's even hard to pry Houston into that group.
Right.
As a division winner.
And they've got their own sets of problems because they got younger at the receiver position. They completely overhauled their offensive line, and I'm not convinced that it's better. I mean, they just shipped Laramie Tunsil out and brought in a draft pick and a veteran in. I don't know that their offensive line is better, and that's pretty critical for a quarterback like C.J. Stroud, who really doesn't run around a lot.
Right.
So there are a lot of factors there, and that is why the cream of the crop is probably going to remain largely the same this year, barring some unforeseen catastrophic
Cincinnati
injury.
might put it together and catch lightning in a bottle again, but they notoriously get out. We'll know after the first month of the season, 5 weeks of the season, whether Cincinnati, we'll know who they are.
Yeah.
We'll know who they are.
Finally, to win the Super Bowl, Buffalo is also projected third behind the Eagles and Chiefs at 9.8%, Philly at 11.5%, Kansas City at 10.8%. So if you round it up, 12, 11, and 10. I feel like the general consensus out there is that Philadelphia may have slid back a bit with their free agent losses this offseason. Some feel similarly about the Chiefs, especially with the changes on the left side of their offensive line, but these simulations are sticking with the familiar favorites, even though the margins are slim. In fact, it's the lowest chance the preseason favorite has had to win the title since ESPN's Football Power Index model began in 2015. What do you make of the narrowness and the close-knit nature of the differences? Because it seems like even these models and simulations are splitting hairs.
I think they're getting more accurate. For lack of a better way to put it, I think they're getting better and better at doing it, and they realize, you get to the end of the season, you can see it with your naked eye.
Yeah.
A spot on fourth down for Buffalo, that game's different.
Yep.
A drop pass by the Ravens in Buffalo's house, it's a tie game going to overtime. A fumble earlier in the on the drive, that game goes different between Baltimore and Buffalo. And then how does Baltimore match up with it? And all that's the razor thin. Not only is Buffalo razor thin against Kansas City, Baltimore's razor thin at Buffalo. It goes on and on.
Yeah.
And it razor thin and a guy gets a concussion for Buffalo and Benford
first quarter.
In the first quarter, now that whole game's changed.
Yep.
You're talking about splitting hairs. That's not fine enough.
Yeah.
You almost got to get to the the atomic level.
Yeah.
Start pulling apart molecules to pick who's going to win these games. You can't tell. So I think they're getting narrow. Those statistical things are getting narrower and narrower because they're getting more accurate.
Yeah. For more on these projections, we bring in the man who helped put them together with ESPN's metrics. ESPN analytics writer Seth Walder joins us now. All right, Seth, so the Football Power Index is up and running for 2025, and we've got some questions. First and foremost, I know you guys have the Eagles with the highest percent chance to win the whole kit and caboodle, and we understand why. Strong roster, defending Super Bowl champs. I did think it was interesting, though, that their margin to the next couple of teams is the narrowest that you guys have had since you've been putting these models together. So is that an indication that the Eagles have ever so slightly fallen back to the top tier of other teams there, or have the other teams kind of inched their way closer? Or maybe it's a combination of both. You tell me.
I might say it's neither. I think that, we go into last year's playoffs, and I don't think that we're talking about the Eagles as being like clearly the best team in football. I think the situation then is kind of the situation now. What I wrote in the story is that we have this football oligarchy of 5 teams, of the Eagles, the Chiefs, the Bills, the Ravens, and the Lions. And I think that it's the fact that we have all of this cluster of teams that are so good and so close to one another that's what depresses the Eagles' chance to win. Like you said, 12% chance to win the Super Bowl. It's the lowest we've ever given to the favorite since we've started these projections in 2015. It's usually in the mid-teens, though back in 2017 or 18. Now I can't remember, but the Patriots were at 32% way back then. Things have changed since that time.
Give us some ideas on that, because I know there's a gazillion things you could put into the variables of how you come up with these power rankings. Give us some of the boulders of what really goes in, and then maybe something people don't think about.
Sure. So actually, in the preseason, this is way more simple than you think. This is mostly driven by the betting market. So what we do is we take the win totals from the betting market, and then we combine that with each team's schedule. So if you think about it, you have 2 teams, both with, say, an 8.5 win total in the betting market. You got to consider the juice, right? One might be favored to the over, the under, but then you also have to consider who those teams are playing against, and because you might have different schedules. And if you think about right, if you think about it, right, so if you have an easier schedule against an 8.5 win team, that means you're worse. You're not as good as a team who is supposed to win 8.5 games against a tough schedule. So we factor in that. Then we have a couple other factors, like the difference between the starting quarterback and the backup quarterback. There we have a kicker rating. We have some factors will determine variance as opposed to overall quality. So if you have a rookie quarterback, for example, it doesn't necessarily move you what we think the average of your outcomes will be, but we think that maybe your upside is higher and your downside is lower than someone like Josh Allen. We have a pretty good idea of who he is.
Yeah. So you mentioned schedule, and I would imagine that our Bills fans, listeners' ears perked up because the Bills have a pretty favorable schedule, not only in terms of strength of schedule, which is pretty weak this year, but also the way in which some of their tougher games have laid out on their schedule. You could argue that their 3 toughest games this year, Ravens, Chiefs, Eagles, they're all spread out. They're at week 1, week 9, and week 16. You could not have asked for a better layout in terms of how a lot of Buffalo's schedule lines up. The front half is relatively soft outside of that Ravens game. So knowing how tightly packed these top 4 teams are, how much advantage could Buffalo gain in taking advantage of a schedule that seems, at least on paper, to line up favorably?
Yeah, I think the schedule really does play a role here. So we have them as the 7th easiest schedule in the NFL, but that's going to make them, of the 5 teams that I mentioned at the top, that's the easiest of that group. And so it's the reason why I mentioned that we have that cluster of 5, right? And they're really tight in terms of our ratings. We rate Buffalo as being the 5th best team, the worst of that group of 5. However, we also give Buffalo the highest projected wins of any team in the NFL. And that right there, what's the reason? It's the schedule. And it's why Buffalo also has the third highest chance to win the Super Bowl. So that plays a big role, especially when we're talking about a group of teams that are all so close. That schedule's huge.
One of the things about it is what you look around at those 5 teams, the Kansas Cities, Buffaloes, Baltimores, Detroits, Phillies. Not much has changed in Kansas City, although, well, not much has changed with Kelsey, with Andy Reid, and Pat Mahomes, and everybody else seems to be, plug in, plug out. Is there a year-over-year consideration for continuity? Is there a year-over-year consideration for, having a guy like Josh coming back as the MVP? Is Lamar coming back as a 2-time MVP? How does that affect the overall view of what you can expect? I mean, it almost doesn't seem like it matters to the Chiefs. What happens outside of Mahomes and Andy, right?
Yeah, no, I think that continuity matters implicitly in the model. It's not explicitly, in the sense that the betting market's certainly going to take it into account. The area where it will count explicitly would be in coaching changes, but we're not talking about that there. There are changes, of course, in Kansas City. Like, they have made some offensive line moves. They traded Joe Tooney. Left tackle, they bring in a guy, Jalen Moore, that I have a lot of questions about. They also drafted a first-round rookie who might fill that spot. So, sure, yes, like Mahomes, Reed, Kelsey, they still have Chris Jones on the other side. Like, the stars are still there. But do you feel, especially in a year where coming out of it, you wonder about their offensive line, do you feel better about their offensive line today? I'm not so sure that you do. And so I think there are some questions there for the Chiefs, but I take your point about the continuity of those stars, and that certainly matters.
Last one we've got for you, Seth, and you covered this in your projection write-up, but the AFC East as a whole, the Bills are still considered the top banana, and we understand why. I don't expect much competition in terms of the division title, but I do think the order in which the teams line up after the Bills is subject to change this year. Steve and I are pretty bullish on the Patriots with a proven coach in Mike Vrabel and an emerging quarterback talent in Drake May. Neither of us would be surprised if they're the team right behind the Bills and maybe even flirting for a playoff berth, but how do you kind of see this shaking out?
Yeah, I get that. We have it super close between Miami and the Patriots. We have Miami at 8.2 wins, the Patriots at 8.1 wins. So you think about how much variance there is here, the margins of error, those two teams are right there. I agree with you. And they're going in opposite directions. That doesn't mean that the Patriots necessarily leapfrog them, but I agree with your general premise that there is reason to be optimistic about what's happening in New England. They certainly added a ton of like just talent to that roster. I didn't personally love a lot of the moves that they made in terms of the value, but there's no question that they have a better team right now. And I think that everyone is kind of on board with Drake May and what they have going on there. So I'm with you. We put 34% chance that the Patriots make the playoffs. That feels right to me. I think that it's got to go right for them, but you can imagine how that works out. And so I could see New England making it there. Only 14% chance to win the division. That's, I think, pretty unlikely. You're going to need just a massive step up from May or maybe an injury in Buffalo.
The Miami-New England games this year, one happens in week 2. The other one doesn't happen until week 18. So those two teams could be in vastly different spots by the time they meet for that second round.
Yes, that's a great point. Yeah, you've got that. Okay, right. And it's New England going down to Miami in early September. It's going to be hot. And then the flip side going to New England in the snow. So that could be, could be wildly different games.
Seth, thanks for the time as always. We appreciate it. We'll keep an eye on more of what you've got to offer there on the analytics page there at ESPN.com. Much appreciated.
Thanks, guys.
Good conversation there with Seth Walder. We transition now to the numbers game, where Steve will be quizzed on one-loss success against Buffalo's 2025 opponents. Steve Tasker, are you ready?
Yep.
Question number 1. Which Bills opponent in 2025 that is not a division rival does Buffalo have the poorest one-loss record against in the regular season? Historically worst regular season record against this 2025 opponent for the Bills that is not in their division.
got two candidates.
Okay.
I'm thinking Cincinnati or Tampa Bay,
And both would be incorrect.
but I didn't guess yet.
Okay, then what is your final answer?
Philly.
It is Philadelphia. 11-19 against the Eagles all time in the regular season.
See what I did there?
That is a 366 win percentage. Yeah, don't do it again. Question number 2.
I win.
Which Bills opponent in 2025 that is not a division rival does Buffalo have the best one-loss record against in the regular season? Flipping it around here. Best
Kansas City.
is not Kansas
Really?
City.
Oh man, I thought
They
over
were
the
in the
years-
running, but
Yeah,
it's not
all
Kansas City.
right. I have some scar tissue from some of these, and I can't do it. I can't. I'm going to say Atlanta.
It's not Atlanta. It's the Carolina Panthers with a 6-2 record and 800 winning percentage against the team from
I
Charlotte.
was going to guess them, but then I had, whatever.
Always guess expansion teams.
Yeah.
Question 3. How many Bills opponents in 2025 that are not division rivals does Buffalo have a winning record against in the regular season? You already know one. Was the previous answer.
Carolina Panthers.
So how many total
I'll say-
teams does Bills have a winning record against that aren't division opponents?
3.
The wheels are turning.
5.
It's actually 4, Steve. Just
Let me
missed the mark.
Show me name them.
I'm going to ask you a question number 4.
All
Can
right.
you name the 4 opponents on this year's schedule who are not division opponents who Buffalo has a regular season winning record against?
Carolina Panthers.
Correct?
I'm going to say Houston Texans.
No.
I'll say the Browns.
Nope.
Gee, many crickets. I'm stumbling. So it was the Panthers.
You guessed one earlier, and I said that was a good guess.
Oh, yeah. Who was it? That was the worst record, though.
No.
Oh.
The answer was the Carolina Panthers for the best
Oh,
record
and I
against.
guessed Tampa Bay.
Tampa
and-
Bay, 6-4.
And I guessed, I'll say New Orleans.
New Orleans, 7-5. There's one left, and it's the one you guessed.
I'm going to say, who was it? Tampa Bay and Cincinnati.
No, it is Kansas City, 28-21 and 1.
All right.
So those are your answers, and that is this edition.
That was a very middling
of the numbers game.
effort by myself.
Got off to a hot start with a clever end around there, and then you were punished for it. Thanks to the karma gods.
Karma.
Bills fans, get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Just download the app today to play any way you want. Plus, with live betting, you'll get updated odds on games that have already started. Best of all, you get paid your winning fast. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the Buffalo Bills. Time now for our one burning question. Steve, what do you believe is a realistic win total for Buffalo this season? ESPN's Football Power Index put the number at 10.6. I think we both believe it'll be over that, but how much over?
I think 12 is the floor.
12 is the floor.
Yeah, I think they got a chance.
Woo!
I think they've got a chance for a really special year this year. I'm going to say 12, and I think that's low.
Yeah.
I think at the high end, depending on obviously we were just talking about how narrow the margins are. Yeah, if they stay healthy, it's 14
Yeah.
games.
I think best case scenario, it's 14. I kind of agree with your floor, so I'm going to sit right in the middle and say 13 is my number.
They've got a good roster, a deep roster, a talented roster, but there's the variables are what we don't know. If they stay healthy, the sky is the limit. They should be not satisfied with anything but the 1 seed if they stay healthy.
Our closing figure deals with Buffalo's one-loss record. Buffalo has had 6 double-digit win seasons in a row under head coach Sean McDermott. The last time the Bills had 6 consecutive double-digit win seasons was, well, never. They've never done it until Sean McDermott made it 6 straight in 2024. The closest they've come previously was Steve's early 90s crew. They had 4 consecutive double-digit win seasons and 5 in 6 years. The interruption of that stretch came in 1989 when the bickering Bills went 9 and 7.
We were 6 and 7 at one point. No, we were 7 and 7 after 14 games in that season. They had to win. We had to win 2 of our last.
Well, your last 2.
No, we had to win 3 of our last. If we won 3 of our last 3, win the last 3 in a row, we would have been in the playoffs. We'd have been gold. As it was, we only won 2 of them, but we got some help, and we got in as a wild card.
That will do it for this episode. Make sure you subscribe so you're notified when the next edition is out, because when you need to know about the Bills, you need to check Bills by the Numbers. For Steve Tasker, I'm Chris Brown. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time, everybody.